Hi ISD 152, this is Austin Zollner, and today I'll be presenting briefly about student data protection and updated FERPA guidance. So what is FERPA? FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It was created in 1974, and it is a law in place that dictates what student information can be shared. This applies to any school that gets federal funding, which essentially is all public and charter schools today. And schools can only share directory information publicly about students, and I'll talk more about directory information shortly. And overall, this act has been weakened over the years. So some specifics about FERPA is that if there are legitimate safety or educational interests involved, FERPA can become a little bit more flexible in terms of what is and what is not allowed. If there are violations, however, parents can file FERPA complaints, and the Family Policy Compliance Office, the FPCO, will investigate those complaints. So the takeaway from here is that parents cannot sue a school directly over a FERPA violation. They have to go through the FPCO, and they will bring those complaints to us. So in terms of directory information, for our district specifically, the things on the left side are things that can be shared publicly, and the things on the right cannot, unless parents opt out of directory information sharing, and we need to give them adequate amount of time before publishing that. Usually that's at the beginning of the year. We have them sign these opt-out forms, or they just accept that this information will be shared. So any direct observations can be shared publicly. So if you see a fight in the hallway or something like that, that can be shared both with other staff members and with the press. Any data recorded by cameras on school property, including school buses, which are school property, that can also be shared. You can share student names, their grade level, when they attended, if they were a full-time or part-time student, their graduation status, any honors or awards they received, photos of normal day-to-day school activities, previous schools that they may have attended, and then also school recognized activities in sports. And within sports, weight and height can actually be shared, again, unless parents opt out. What cannot be shared are social security numbers, student ID numbers, their religion, their race, their color, their social position, and their nationality. And these were taken directly from our district website policies. So then we come to the issue of security and security cameras. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but bear with me. So most schools have security cameras, especially in high schools. Cameras that are in plain view are allowed. So, hallways, cafeteria, recess areas, things like that, those are totally fine. But obviously you can't be putting cameras in bathrooms and locker rooms. That's not allowing privacy. And because Minnesota is a one-party consent state, we do not need to ask for permission as long as one of the two parties knows they are recording. But kind of as a gesture of goodwill, it would be smart to make sure there are signs up notifying parents and guests that they will be recorded. So that's just something to keep in mind. But if surveillance is run by school law enforcement, then any data collected is not part of a student's educational records, and therefore it is not confidential, and they are able to share that with media. But if it is run by the school and law enforcement requests certain video footage, there must be written consent given by the parents. On top of that, due to open record laws, most school surveillance recordings are open to public records requests by the media. So if the media requests these public records, most school surveillance has to be handed over. Parents can also request video surveillance of their child, even if in the video there's more than just their child. It is the school's job to try to pull apart and siphon out parts of the video that aren't needed, so it's just their student as much as possible, without taking away the overall meaning of the video. If it's not possible, then the parent does have the right to view this video as a whole. But on top of that, with viewing the video, we can charge parents for copies, but that can't be a detrimental factor to them viewing the video. Usually the thing that we see is that face scrubbing and face blurring is our sort of status quo, and that's a pretty pricey and time-consuming activity that has to be done. So in terms of documents and file safety, there are, like I said, rare exceptions of schools that are override FERPA, or when schools override FERPA, and that is when there's a judicial order given, if there's any involvement with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, if there's any sort of epidemic or disease or pandemic outbreak, or a campus school shooting. That is when FERPA can be overridden and a school can share students' educational records with designated personnel and law enforcement officers. So in terms of security, I've already touched on these slides. Basically, we are a one-party consent state, so only one of the two parties needs to have permission to record. So in terms of file safety, the main questions that we as a district should be asking is, when we have files or student information, the first question to ask ourselves is, why are we holding on to this information? How long should we hold on to it? Is it necessary to keep it for years, or can we dispose of it right away? Who has access to it? Is this an open information platform, or is it just very select people that should be able to view it? And then finally, is my third-party app or vendor FERPA compliant? Because if they are not FERPA compliant, then we are actually the ones at fault. So the steps to sort of just keep in mind to boil it down for data use is, you want to capture the data securely, you want to organize it in a way that is useful and use it appropriately as needed. Then you want to manage and store it properly, and then finally destroy it properly once you are done needing it. So again, just a couple of reminders with file safety. You don't want to leave computers open when you're not around. You want to shred old documents about past students, such as IEPs and 504s, and even incident reports. And like I mentioned, you want to use FERPA compliant vendors, otherwise we, the school, are at fault. And a side note with that, these free, quote-unquote, free services are rarely free, and they often are obviously making money somehow, and that's through selling student data. So, just a couple considerations. FERPA actually doesn't require schools to destroy data. That is up to the schools to develop policies about how and when to destroy these educational records. So the overall takeaway is that parents will be advocating for their students, and that certainly is a good thing. We want parent involvement when it comes to their records and privacy. The big question, though, is we need to be prepared, and are we going to be prepared to answer those requests? So in the future, I've boiled it down to sort of 4 main points for FERPA compliance in the future. One thing we want to sort of think about is, how can we raise awareness in our school and train school employees in these policies and procedures so that we're all on the same page. Just a reminder that we do get federal funds, so we must follow FERPA. When we're picking out apps and vendors for our students in the classroom, we want to pick third-party FERPA compliant vendors. Otherwise, we are liable, like I mentioned before. And then finally, we want to just implement overall prevention tools for issues like this. So a big one is, just stay off social media about anything school related. It's just really, the risk versus reward is just not worth it. And overall, just, things said in emails can be misconstrued and misinterpreted. So a big thing to avoid, you don't want to have a reply all mistake. So make sure you're very careful about who you are emailing it to. So, and then here's my list of sources used for the FERPA presentation. So if you have any questions about those, feel free to let me know. Again, my name is Austin Zollner, and thank you for listening.